So,
Here
all
we
right,
are.
it is 11 o'clock,
Okay.
and I have a feeling we'll end up needing more time than we'll have. So why not get started? Uh, why don't I let you guys introduce yourselves? We'll go down. I'll just, for my order of my screen, we'll start with Valerie. I'm going to mute and try to get the baby out of the office.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Victoria. So I am Valerie Valdez, author of Chilling Effect and the sequel Prime Deceptions, which is coming out in September. They are space operas. They are a Cuban-American descended character and her crew going on many misadventures, trying to oppose a vast intergalactic bad guy organization called the Fridge. And so that's it. You can find me online at Valerie Valdez, and my poetry is out in Uncanny Magazine this month. Yay! That's me.
I'm Melissa Caruso. I'm the author of the Swords and Fire trilogy from Orbit Books, which begins with The Tethered Mage. And I have a new book coming out this June, The Obsidian Tower, which begins a new trilogy, also from Orbit, called Brooks in Ruin.
Hi, I'm Martha Wells. I have several series out right now. The most recent is the Books of the Raxura fantasy series, and then the Murderbot Diaries. And the new novel in that series just came out last week, the week before. I can't remember now. It's several years and just a few days. And that's what I've been mostly working on for the past few years.
Melissa, did I miss your introduction?
That's fine. We're good. If we could
Okay, awesome. Quick intro. For me, I'm Victoria Sandbrook. I am your moderator for the hour. I'm a spec-fic writer. I have a handful of short stories published. I lean towards fantasy, but sometimes I split the difference with sci-fi. I have two girls. They might be loud. I have two dogs. At least they're away. I'm as interested to hear what you guys have to say about plot and revision as probably any one of the attendees. I've been working on novels for who knows how long, and it just feels like it's constant revision. So I also have not been working because I have a 1-year-old. So everything I have to pick up is half finished and half done and in need of revision. So I'm hoping our conversation will move me along as much as it's going to move anyone else listening in. To our attendees, I am on Discord, and I will be keeping an eye on questions. I'll probably check in around 11:30 if we've just been talking. I'll check in around 11:30 and try to get back to some questions. I know it's a great place to just drop them, and I want to make sure we've got time to really explore everything. And I think that's probably about it. So, plot and revision. It's a huge umbrella. What is plot? What is revision? How do we answer these existential questions of writing? But I think it's not a terrible place to start, especially when we're also going to be talking about structure. The way I've sort of thought of this coming into the panel is that plot is the what happens, and structure is the order in which you read it, or the method in which it's presented to the reader. And I don't know if that works for everybody. I don't know if that's, is that a good breakdown for you guys? What do you think?
I think so. I think you can also have structure can be on the micro level too. It's the structure of a scene, the structure of a paragraph. Whereas people, I think, most generally think of plot as being the entire story laid out from beginning to end, where structure can be a component as well as your entire structure.
Yeah.
I tend to think of schools like the skeleton, like the absolute core skeleton, and then everything else gets built on top of it. Which is, of course, why when you have structural problems and you have an arm growing out of your head, story-wise, then it can be particularly annoying to fix.
Yeah, I would add sometimes they even get like more nitty-gritty, where you have like plot is what happens on the page, structure is how it happens, and then story is kind of the all-encompassing what happens beyond the page, the backstory, the whatever happens after, what's happening behind the scenes. So you can get more definitional about it if you want, but yeah, otherwise definitely.
Yeah, I like that definition. I like that way of looking.
Yeah. So at the point where we're talking about plot and revision in particular, the idea is that we're talking about something that has a plot. Maybe it feels like it's got a beginning and a middle and an end-ish. You know, it's something that we know that there's something happening. We're not in a story that's lacking plot. We're starting to work on that first pass, third pass, final pass, whatever. Where do you guys typically, like, if you've done a first pass, let's say, where do you guys typically start looking for problems with your plot? Is it something you know going in usually with your revisions, or is it something where you have a process for hunting?
I will jump
can
in
start.
since. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
I will do better about pointing people out. We'll go reverse order this time. Now Valerie's drinking. So Melissa, we'll start with you.
Okay, sure. I do a little bit of both. Usually by the time I finish a draft, I already know some things that are not working as well as they could be and want to fix them structurally. And then there's other things where I'm like, okay, this section it doesn't feel right, and I'm not 100% sure why. And I do have tools and methods for trying to chase down what the source of the problem is. For me, it's kind of almost like it usually feels like I'm bringing the story into kind of a sharper focus. Like I start with a blurry mass of like colors, and then everything I do is just sharpening that focus a little bit more and getting it a little bit more true to find where the real story is. Sometimes you got to crop that photo, and you had this, and you actually this bit over here.
I like that. What about you, Martha?
It kind of depends on the story for me and how difficult, how complicated it is. Usually, I do a lot of revision as I'm going along. And sometimes that's to one degree or the other. Sometimes it's just a matter of, changing my mind about something and going back and fixing it, or realize I've gone off kind of I'm a pantser, obviously. I've gone off on a wrong direction and kind of got myself into a corner, and I need to back up now and try to figure out where exactly I went wrong. I don't plot out a whole lot in advance. And I wish I did sometimes, because I feel like it would be much easier on me. In particular with the Murderbot books, the logistics of those are so complicated because of the characters. The main character's multiple POV, so that takes a lot of thinking and work and rewriting and writing and trying to look for the right way and adding stuff on. So a lot of times when I've done all the novellas so far and the novel, it'll be like write 5 to 10, sometimes even 20,000 words, and then realize I've just gone the wrong way and cutting that back and starting over. And trying to revise out, the bits that I want to keep. That's not usually as I don't usually have that problem with my fantasy novels. I think it's more because Murderbot is in first person, so it's easier for me to write that voice. And so I can write that voice doing all kinds of stuff that I then look at and go, this is not any good. I need to get rid of this and go and think of another plot because another plot branch because it's just not working.
What about you, Valerie?
I'm an over plotter, and so often what happens to me is as I'm writing it, I realize I have done too much plotting, and I just have put too many things in the outline, and I cannot keep them all, and it doesn't work. And so I generally draft during November, National Novel Writing Month, or one of the ancillary camp nanos. So I am typically trying to write very many words very quickly just for the first draft to be finished. So as I go, what I tend to do is take notes on what needs to change. But because I'm trying to maintain the daily word count of about 1,700 words minimum, I don't stop. I just keep that note, and then I will write forward as if I have already changed the thing that needs changing, and then go back and revise it later to make sense. But just I've gotten into that habit of as I go taking notes. And by the time I'm finished with a complete draft, chances are that either I've done a little bit of like Martha says, where I have reread what I wrote the previous day and kind of tweaked it, fixed it up a little bit, or I have a lot of notes already to myself to know what I need to go back and fix. And so I start usually with those things, which tend to be bigger picture items rather than little details. But every once in a while, it'll be like kind of the reverse Chekhov's gun, like, hey, Valerie, you need to go put this gun on the mantle so that it will be there in a later chapter. So it can be stuff like that, but it's generally more big picture stuff. But I've already got these notes on hand, and so I start with those and then work forward from there.
Okay. Both of your responses made me think, Melissa, are you a pantser or a plotter?
I'm a combo. I'm definitely on the plotter side of it. I always have an outline, but I will edit the outline as I go. Like, I don't consider myself to it. So if I get to a point and I'm like, no, I'll go ahead and change the outline for the rest of it. So I tend to, I usually have at least 2 points during the first draft when I go, nope, you know what, I'm going in the wrong direction. I need to restart, and I go back. And I don't throw everything out because I never meet my deadlines. But but I'll edit heavily going in a different direction or whatever. So sort of like a flexible plotter, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So we've got, I like that we've got a really interesting like balance of like lots of outlining, not a lot of plotting as we go, like plotting as we go, kind of somewhere in between. I think it's a good way to show that it all works. It's so long as it works for you. So I'm just trying to think of the way to phrase this exactly. If the trouble is you do need to stop and change directions, do you each tend to be sort of like, I know where I need to go and I'm going to write my way, like I'm not even talking like the larger plot, I'm saying like connecting to two parts of the plot. Do you tend to think, I know where I need to go and I'm going to find my way there? Or do you tend to sort of follow a path that you see and end up at the next place? Does this make any sense? Like, you're going to mountain B from mountain A, or you're just going to take this path that's kind of clear to you as a writer and you're going to see where it goes, this as like a revision sort of element here. I'm like not speaking very clearly.
No, I got what you meant.
Okay.
Maybe it's on a pantser, but usually what I do is it's like by the time I climb Mountain A, usually then I can see Mountain B, and so I start heading that way. And usually by the time I get there, mountains C, D, and E are starting to appear, and so that's a good analogy, actually.
What about you, Valerie?
Yeah, I tend to revise chronologically, but yeah, as I go, things will become apparent that were not necessarily apparent before. And so, I'll catch something that I'll be like, oh, if I change this is a ripple effect. So then I need to go throughout and try to find it. Or, you'll have a character situation that you need to resolve, or again, something that you need to go back. You'll unfortunately look over your shoulder and realize there was a different mountain that you should have done first, and now you got to go do that one. So I usually have, like I said, a kind of a list of action items, a punch list or what have you, that I have to work on. But you're always going to find new stuff while you're doing the revision that you're going to have to address, because everything is kind of linked together, and so changing one thing can have ripple effects that you didn't anticipate.
Sometimes there's a canyon between the mountains and you fall into it, and then like 2 or 3 months climbing out. I've done that a lot. So.
Oh no, Mr. Bill.
Yeah. I know
what about you, Melissa?
Okay, yeah. Just jumping in. I know for me, one thing I tend to think about a lot when I'm doing a structural revision is the through line, which seems relevant here. So the sense of like, okay, I know A needs to happen and I know that B needs to happen, but I really need A to flow organically into B, and I need there not to be a moment in the middle where it kind of goes dead because we've accomplished A and B hasn't started yet, and now the character's just like, so I don't know, what do you want to do? You don't want it to be like when you're in 5th grade sitting around your living room with your friends. So I have to think about the main character, or if you have multiples, whatever, the agency of my main character and how they can keep moving towards that second mountain, even if I'm kind of done with the first mountain, and how I can still have questions in the reader's mind that they want answered. They're going to keep them looking forward to that second mountain, even if they don't know what it is yet. And
Yeah.
sometimes I have to do, if sometimes it's tricky if mountain B is a big surprise plot twist and they think they're going to mountain C, you're like, look at mountain B, then, but you still have to keep them with you on the road. So sometimes I have to do a fake out and be like, look, here's mountain C, you're totally going here, we're really worried about this, oh, I dropped this other thing on you, but you still have to see that thing in the distance and have a direction that you're going and have it feel like things are moving forward. And that's something I always have to fix in revision, because as a demi plotter, I don't know, as a mostly plotter, I usually think of the series of events originally as something that's happening to the character, because I like to surprise them a lot. But ultimately, it has to be a series of events that the character is doing. That's almost always something that I have to fix in revision, and
Right.
it's
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to get like a weird analogy, my son plays a lot of Minecraft, and so there's a mode called God mode where you can literally just fly around and do whatever you want. Basically, you can get up really high, see the whole world. You can zip to the tops of mountains. You can go to wherever you want. Basically, you can go underwater without drowning, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of the author's eye view of the story, where we can just move around and do whatever we want and see whatever we want. But we always have to then, especially in revisions, bring it back down to the reader's view, which is the person playing through the actual game, and they have to be able
Right.
to experience it in a way that makes sense. And as opposed to my son putting water everywhere because it's hilarious, like you can't do that to a reader in a story. And so you've got that God mode, author's eye view, but then when you're revising, you're trying to put yourself in the reader's eye view to feel how they're experiencing the story, whether the emotional beats are occurring in kind of a reasonable, satisfying way, whether the characters are hitting good choice points, in a logical progression, stuff like that. And so just being able to separate those two views, that's the difference kind of between the writing side and the revision side.
Right. Right.
I think that's a lot of that is POV, is point of view, and teaching very new writers. I think that's one of the biggest problems people have. Some people get it kind of automatically. Excuse me. Some people get it kind of automatically, and other people really kind of have to learn it. And particularly, one of the problems, oh man, well now I can't talk. Anyway, one of the problems is people kind of thinking about, because I tend to go from, I never try to go into God mode. I always try to like stick with the characters I'm writing and coming up with stuff. Thinking about what you as a person would do in the situation you've come up with, and not what the character would do, who is going to be a completely different person with different abilities. Especially if you're writing science fiction and fantasy, you might be writing about a non-human character and all these things, and having to kind of really stick with that and not kind of bring your own experience, try to bring your own experience and emotional reactions into it. I mean, that's part of it, but it's like you're running someone else's software on your hardware. And I think that's that POV thing can be a problem that feels like it's just confined to the character, but it's actually something that can spread through your plot and cause you a lot of trouble when you don't have a lot of experience.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up, because it's been kind of hard for me trying to find questions that are really sticking to this sort of plot structure revision kind of push, because for me a lot of these problems come up when I'm not doing justice to my characters, or when I have those POV problems, and I had a historical fantasy. I shopped around for a while, and I think a lot of the challenges I had in revision were when I would have a reaction of something I wanted, and it was obviously not. It wasn't even too far out of character. It was too far out of time. It was too far out of setting. Like just wasn't. And my character was trying. I was trying to make my character me and not her. And it was one of those. It felt like a very newbie writer thing, but I was so deep into it that I didn't even notice until kind of late that some of these issues were sort of still sitting in that manuscript, sort of hidden. So it was really interesting that that you brought that up, because I feel like I've had experience like losing myself in that.
Yeah, it's a newbie writer problem, because I've fallen into it probably more than I remember. The last time probably was distinctly remember was like my 4th novel. So it's not like, it's like something that can pop up at any moment. And I think too. It's something that it's a little bit of a discipline, and if you don't kind of keep your eye on it, you can lose it too.
Mm, mm,
Related to that, I mean, structure is fundamentally character driven. So I know, I don't know if anyone else had this experience, but I know with my trilogy that's out now, with the first book, I'm still figuring out the character during drafting, and it's just, I have so many more structural problems because I don't have as good a grip on the character yet. And then with the later structure got easier and easier, and by the third book in the trilogy, it was the time I ever had with the structure, because I knew what the characters wanted and I knew what their conflicts were, and I knew what they were going to do much better. I didn't have to have that flailing around of like, wait, okay, no, I'm still learning this character. What would they do here? So
Yeah. I think sometimes people think of characterization as something that sort of happens all at once before the novel, and then you start writing. And it's like a lot of the time, especially with me, I have trouble developing characters until they start talking to people, start talking to each other, and kind of learn more detail about the relationship and how these two personalities are going to fit together, how these different personalities fit together, and also how they react to the different situations and react to their environment and everything. It's all kind of a big piece, which in some ways I panels like this where it's like we're supposed to be talking about plot and revision, but they're just all these interconnected web of stuff that goes out to every other thing. It's like people wanting to differentiate between world building and developing a character. It's like they're like this. The one causes the other in this sort of Mobius loop, whatever, an infinity loop. Everything's feeding back into each other.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I think Melissa said earlier about, in the first draft, the plot is what is happening to the character, because it's the things you're throwing at your character in order to understand your character more and get to know your character. And then once you know your character, you can go back and your character can be making those decisions in your revision and decide, like, in moving the plot forward instead of being moved by all these external forces. Valerie, did you want to add anything to that before I?
And one of the tough things is a lot of people will end up writing characters who are in positions where they have very little agency in the beginning, and the story can be one in which they gain agency throughout. And so it can be difficult then structurally to be like, all right, this feels like a lot of things, like you said, are happening to the character versus the character making choices that are leading to things happening. But sometimes that is the kind of story that you're writing. And so it really, I think it was Martha who said earlier that it depends on the story. Everything kind of, it comes out of character, it comes out of plot, it comes out of world, and all the things are just like a giant tangle that you can't separate them really.
So I have a question, now that we've said like all this interconnects, of course, specifically about when structure, like your process when your structure may not be either chronological or particularly obvious to the reader. I'm thinking of anything from heist stories where the reader sees what happens but doesn't see why or all the how, and you have that, you go back through the scene, or stories that are told without a firm eye on chronology, or there's that twist in the middle where you realize that this story is being told by the same person in 3 timelines, that sort of thing. How do you approach revising when you have all of those threads in your hands all at once, if that's something you've done before?
That's not easy. That's why I end up, it took me 18 months to write my last book. It just, again, I'm trying to experience it. I usually try to write and kind of like come up with the plot almost like right before the reader sees it, is what I'm kind of do. So I think in some ways that's easier, as I'm moving forward. My draft, I don't really do like first draft, second draft, third draft. I'm doing a completed draft that's going to go back and need some work and tweaking and all this other stuff, but it's a lot closer to finished than it would be if I just kind of wrote straight through and then realized, this has to go, it doesn't work. So that's basically how I do it, is I try to do it all at once and try to bring all the threads in all at once. And again, it means a lot of rewriting and a lot of going back, but I'm closer to finished by the time I get there. Also, I think it allows for me to have a lot of surprises, because a lot of times I'll come up with something. I'll have the character as I'm writing like an action scene or whatever is going on, I realize the character made a mistake, that's a mistake, that's not going to work. And I think, well, would it be, how would the plot change if, yeah, they made that mistake and then realized it and they had to go back, they had to try to fix it, and then we went on from there, and that kind of changed the plot slightly. I've had plot times when I've had a logistical problem, and it's helped me to kind of skip ahead to know where a little bit to where the characters were going. And once I kind of get that and kind of figure out and get that scene more clearly in my head, then I can go back and figure out the logistics of how we got there. But usually it's not particularly complicated logistics. It only works if I'm like trying to get them in motion from one location to another, and how that's going to work with pacing and everything. So yeah, it's like, I guess my solution to that is to not do it. The re-envision is just to do it while I'm trying to come up with the first draft.
Totally, I think that's a total legitimate answer to the question. Melissa, Valerie?
I haven't written anything that wasn't chronological or anything, but in terms of layering in things like, for instance, in the series I have now, there are certain scenes that once you have read through the whole book or the whole trilogy, they have additional layers of meaning because you know things that you didn't know on the first read through, or when I have like a mystery and I'm dropping hints, throughout it and that sort of thing. And honestly, I think that that's where the revision part for me comes in really super handy. In general, during my editing process, I'm like so few of the words in the original draft to make it through to the final book. So I'm really rewriting a lot of these scenes anyway, or at least heavily touching them up. So, and I know when I was a young writer, I used to wonder, like, wow, how do they drop all these hints and then they come up later and it looks so brilliantly woven? And now I know they just did it during revision, right? You go back and go, okay, like I think Valerie was saying, where you need to put the Chekhovian gun on the mantle, but it's not there in your first draft. You go back later and like, okay, I'm gonna put this here. Ooh, I'm gonna layer this in, and maybe someone will pick up on this. I love putting in Easter eggs that only rereaders will pick up. Where they go back and they go, oh, that was about that, and you couldn't possibly know until you finish the book. But that all happens in revision because I don't have the huge brain to like actually plan all of that out on the first try.
Yeah, or the other way is that you do the lost method. I don't know if I'd recommend it fully, but where you just put a lot of guns on a lot of mantles, and then as you're revising, you start slowly taking guns off the mantles because you actually did not use that gun, and so you don't need it anymore. I actually did. I have a non-chronological short story in time travel short stories, and it was a kind of a non-conventional form of time travel in which people develop the technology to send their own like bodily injuries back in time, basically at different points in their timeline, so that it could kind of spread the pain around for themselves. And that was a story that it was, like you were saying, it's the same character but in 3 different time periods. So the character is a child, the character is a young woman, and then the character basically about to die. And so revising that, the things that I had to keep in mind were essentially the flow of information reveal, who knows what and when. It starts in the POV of the child. She knows nothing. She's a child. She's 6 years old. And so being aware that all she knows, I'm sorry, I started getting an echo weirdly. All she knows is that she suddenly has a bruise that she can't explain, and where is it coming from and what's going on, and she's getting taken to the doctor and so on and so forth. But throughout the process of revising the story, that's sort of the thing to keep in mind is if you're doing it out of order, something like ancillary justice, where you have 2 timelines that are essentially the same thing, but you figure out what information can be revealed when, such that it will be emotionally satisfying. What character POV is, POV fixes everything. What character POV is the one that I need to use right now to convey the emotional, the thing that's emotionally resonant, while also giving the information needed to proceed with the plot. And just, keeping track again of just that flow. You can have your own separate notes document where you literally are just tracking what that flow is, so that you can be aware of it as you go. Or in a short story, sometimes you're able to juggle it a little better in your head without writing it down. In a novel, though, like, I can't even imagine trying to keep it all straight without notes.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That actually segues into a question that came up or a little bit of a discussion that came up on Discord that led me to a question to ask all of you. What tools do you use when you revise? Programs, notebooks, scraps of paper at the back of your hand? What do you need when you're going back through something, especially something big? Melissa?
There's a few different things that I find really helpful, and it's not so much apps as just methods that I use. One thing that I do, so when I'm going to revise, the first thing I do is I make a list of every existing scene in my draft with just short descriptions of a few words of each scene that reminds me what that scene is in the order that they occur. And this lets me have kind of a bird's eye view of the structure. Hard to hold that all in your head. It's easy to just remember the key turning points and forget that, oh, I had like 6 scenes where nothing happens in between here. But when you actually write them out, you can spot that kind of thing much more easily. So that's sort of my really go-to basic tool, and then I can work with that. I do things like I'll color code it. I make what I call a stakes map, where I take every scene in that list and I color code it by the how high the stakes are, essentially. Like low stakes scenes where we're just sitting around going, oh, well, this is terrible. What is our plan to deal with this situation? But there's nothing really personally at stake is green. And then, higher stakes scenes, I do a different color, and I might have a different color for action scenes. And then when I look at that, I can just take in at a glance, okay, there's this big green low stakes part right here in the middle, and I need to do something about that. Or, oh, look, all of my red action scenes are in this one part of the book, and maybe I need to spread that out a little more. And I can just look at it and cut straight to seeing things about the book that might have taken me weeks to figure out otherwise. So that's hugely useful for me. Another thing that I will do is pull out individual plot or character arcs and just make a little bulleted list of the key turning points and in them, so that I can make sure that it's not like, one thing that I don't know if other people fall into this in drafting, but I think it's very easy to fall into, okay, I introduced the plot, it's very exciting, or the character arc or whatever, and then I have a great conclusion. And then in the middle, we have the eternal twilight of the status quo, where nothing really changes, and we just keep being like, that thing still happening, and like, so. And when I make those like 6 bullet points about the key turning points, and the middle ones are all like, yep, still happening, then I can spot that and know that I need to fix that. And it can help to pull it out of the rest of the book, because if I have it kind of spaced out throughout it, then I may not see that. But if I pull out that particular character arc or plot arc, I can see if it's stalling out much better.
Awesome. What about you, Valerie?
Yeah, my process ranges from either oh my gosh, make a spreadsheet because or sometimes I often just do a kind of a reverse outline where I take the original outline that I had and then I read my book and I change the outline to what I actually wrote versus what I thought I was going to write when I first started. And in doing that, I kind of do the same sort of stuff Melissa outlined, where I try to figure out, okay, do I have too many action scenes back to back or too many non-action scenes back to back? Do I have too many scenes where, like she said, the stakes are not increasing, or there's not a sense of any changes that are happening, and it's just kind of like progress bar, they're grinding towards a new level or something like that. And so those are the kinds of things that I do as well. I usually will also note which characters in which scenes, so that if a character has disappeared for a while, I can make sure I add them back in somehow. I try to keep track again of the flow of information. I try to make sure, one thing is that sometimes readers can lose track over the course of a novel, sometimes more writers than the readers, frankly, of information that they kind of need to retain in order for things going forward to make sense. Like, oh, did you forget that so-and-so was doing this thing? And it's like, oh, let me remind them of that because it's been a few chapters since I brought it up. And so things like that, just making sure that certain things are fresh in the mind, that there is that kind of continuity of information flow and stakes, and having those characters present so that they don't disappear for a long while without having good reason, because obviously characters can come and go. But my books are crew books, and so the crew is they're all there, and so they kind of all have to be there.
What about you, Martha?
Yeah, I've taken notes one. Usually I take my notes on paper so it's easier for me to flip through and look at them and make, diagram outlines and things like that, just for if I need to do that. Sometimes I'll like trying to figure out a sequence of action or a sequence of plot. I'll kind of do little things. This happens and then a little arrow down and that, but that's what I do. I think what I do more is just, besides exhaustively reading over the book and what I've done and kind of figuring out what needs to go where and moving things around. Sometimes I'll have the characters just talk about something that might be happening or they might be going to try to do, and then see what I can come up with that way. I've had to do outlines only a few times for my media tie-ins for Star Wars, and then for the 2 Stargate Atlantis novels I did. And for the Stargate Atlantis novel, I realized really quickly that I can't outline action scenes. I can come up with what I think will work, but when I actually start to write the characters doing it, it just occurred, this is not going to work. This is going to get them killed. This is dumb, and I can't really visualize it until I'm actually writing the characters doing it. I kind of get into the situations. It reminds me a bit of, there's before the version of The Big Sleep that's actually, is it The Big Sleep? Yeah, I think it is. That's actually was shown in the movie theaters. There was an earlier version that was edited, and one of the things they had trouble, the plot is so complicated, the screenwriters had trouble figuring it out. So they actually have added a scene where Humphrey Bogart goes to the DA's office and all the law enforcement characters sit around, and he basically diagrams the plot on a blackboard and explains what's gone on so far, because they were thinking this movie's so complicated the audience won't understand it. And if you're watching the movie, you're just like, I don't care. I'm experiencing the movie as it goes along, and I'm not worried about, the 40 million things that are happening in this plot. So I kind of try to keep that in mind, that it can be very complicated, but I really do need to look at my POV character and what is actually happening to them.
I really actually, I'm gonna remember that about Big Sleep. Like that's great, because I constantly think no one's gonna know what's going on, and it's like, no, it's gonna be fine. They don't need to know. You're the only one that needs to know.
There's a TCM documentary about it, which is really great for writers, because they talk about the adapting the movie and the earlier version, and then the revision they did when War and Call became more popular, basically. And it's really kind of interesting for any kind of writer to see, the process they went through. And that, writers all through time have been sitting there trying to adapt things, going, I can't remember what happened, Well, happened, let's do this, let's try to diagram it. So
I think that, oh, go ahead.
Okay. I know that I always find myself in drafts writing planning scenes where the characters are trying to figure out what they're going to do next, which is really just me trying to figure out what the characters are going to do next, and I have to cut those every single time. I cut like 2-3 of those things from a draft.
Yeah, it's funny how much
I watched the extras of Endgame last night on the Disney Channel, and there's a big cut scene where during the final battle, all the characters get together, while the battle's going around, and talk about what they're going to do next. I said, yeah, we cut this because it just it slows everything down. It's like, no kidding, it's terrible. But it's an impulse, and I guess they said they ended up taking some of these conversations and moments and spreading them out and giving them more drama all through the set piece. So
I think the best way to handle it is like the heist model, where it's like, okay, you can talk about the plan in advance if you want, but if you're going to talk about it, the only reason you're doing that is because it's not going to work. That's it. Because otherwise, if in a heist where the things are probably going to work, you just cut to the things and then do them.
You start ending up into bad Victorian drama territory, where you sit down and tell the audience what's going to happen so they won't get upset, when or get overexcited or anything.
Yeah. I have another example from a movie that actually, and I read something recently about the original Star Wars trilogy, and George Lucas's now ex-wife, who was was one of the editors, and the way she influenced a lot of the scenes. I believe she edited in Han's shot first. I believe she changed, from what I read, she changed the original Death Star run to actually it's like the climax is really there when the Millennium Falcon shows up, And I can't imagine, like, from the description of what I read, the original scene looking like, I can't imagine being moved by that. Like, that's a huge emotional moment. So it really goes, I think, maybe that's something, homework we can give our listeners here is, if you're really feeling like you can't revise, like, go look up all these documentaries about the making of movies and that sort of thing. We don't talk about sort of the guts of writing these books as often as we tend to talk about the making of a movie. So I think that might be a great place to go. Look at the end scene, of your favorite whatever, and listen to how much this changes. Frozen 2 actually had great, like, what happened to make this movie kind of stuff at the back. I have a 4-year-old, this is why I know. So that's, so maybe if you're really feeling stuck, go there, listen to what hit the editing floor and why. Think about why those deleted scenes were deleted. Maybe you don't need them. You probably don't.
Yeah.
So, we have about 9 minutes left, so I want to get back to questions. Real quick, if you can think of an example, I liked this question from the audience here. What's the best or worst place you have found yourself while revising your plot? One of those, oh my goodness moments, and either something you've, like a big backtrack or a big, like, great thing that you would, that you'd be willing to share, if you can think of one.
I can think of, well, I forget most of what happens during my books. I guess it's self-protection because I forgot how horrible it was in the book, and so then I'll go ahead and do another one. With Network Effect, I'd been coming up with these ideas for scenes, and I thought, well, just that were not chronological. So I thought, well, I'll just write them, and maybe it'll be like a flashback. And then I just got to a certain point in the book and went, oh, that's what all these were for. They were for this moment, and so that was just kind of serendipitous. I went, then I could go back and kind of edit them and make them work better for that. But part of it was just like I was having so much trouble writing. It's like, I've got this great, this is a great set piece scene. It doesn't fit into the book, but I'm just going to write it, and then maybe I'll figure someplace else, someplace for it. But it ended up all being part of this one moment in the book. So
awesome. That's a great case for side writing. Like,
yeah.
like, I'm just gonna practice, then I'll throw it away. And like, no, I'm gonna keep it and use it, and it's gonna be important.
It's a flashback. It's like, it doesn't really fit, but maybe I'll figure out a place for this flashback to fit. And it's like, oh wow, it did. So.
Nice. Do either of you, and Valerie and Melissa have anything you can add?
Oh, sure. When I was writing the Unbound Empire, which is the third book of my Swords and Fire trilogy, I had to write the rough draft in a little under 3 months, like 2.5 months. It was a crazy deadline. And I got halfway through, and I had this idea that would really up the stakes and make it so much cooler. And I was looking at this horrible deadline coming at me and like, but it would be so much better and so much more mean and horrible and good. But I had this whole angsty almost breakdown about whether I needed to go back and do this edit now, but I did. And it ruined my personal life, but it was so worth it, and just really up the stakes for the book. And so, definitely, if you're doing your edit and you're afraid, just go do it. Do the work. Never be afraid of the work. It's worth it.
Yeah, I think it's something kind of Martha sort of mentioned earlier. I had an issue also when I had hit about the halfway point of Chilling Effect, where I was writing and then I just stopped because I was like, I don't know, I've kind of lost interest here. This doesn't feel right. It's something's not working. And I realized it was that I had a character basically make a wrong choice, and I just had to backtrack and be like, well, actually, what if the worst thing happened here instead of what did happen here? And it made for just a much more interesting and compelling story going forward. And again, it just kind of, it fixed everything. Everything else fell into place right after that. So sometimes even as you're drafting or as you're revising, you'll hit a point where a character makes a choice and then you think, perhaps instead they should make the much worse choice. And then it makes everything much more interesting. So.
Well, listening to your gut like that is so important, and that's when I think when we tell new writers that they need a lot of experience. That's kind of what we're trying to say. It's like you
Mm.
have to learn to listen to your back brain, your subconscious, and these gut feelings. Because I think a lot of people would hit a point like that and say, well, I'm just being lazy. I need to force myself to go on. And if you force yourself to go on, your writing, it's going to get more and more difficult because you've drifted further and further away from what you really wanted to do with the book. And that's
Mm.
kind of a really important thing, is kind of learning when I just don't feel like writing today, the difference between that and I've done something really wrong and this is just not working. And even, you know, I've been doing this for 27 something years, and I still hit those moments where I'm just staring at the page and I'm trying to type a line and it's not happening, and kind of going, well, you know what? You've been writing crap and you need to take it all out and go back and find out the spot where something went wrong. And a lot of times I'll finally really look at it and go, yeah, this is not going to work this doesn't match something else I've done. This doesn't match. There's a continuity mistake in here, a subtle one, but there is one. Or this doesn't match this, you know, this is not the way to the mountain B or C or D, wherever we're heading. And it's gonna take us off in a direction we don't want to go.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's so true. And I know anytime I feel that resistance, like, okay, sometimes, yeah, I just didn't get enough sleep last night, but I know that I'm almost always pushing in the wrong direction, or the thing that I really don't want to work on, that means that I need to fix something about it. Or the thing that I'm hoping my editor will let me get away with, that I'm like, oh, that's so much work, and I want to fix it. She's not going to let me get away with that. I need to just go fix it myself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that too. Especially, it's like, yeah, I had friends. I was editing one of her stories for her, you know, helping, like, giving her beta comments basically, and I hit this part where she'd had something happen off stage, and I said, no, this needs to happen on stage. You can't just describe it like that. It's not gonna work. And she wrote me back and said, I knew you were gonna say that, but I just needed you to make me do it. And it's like, yeah, it was much better with when she actually went and did it.
Like, I didn't want to write that scene, but I knew I had to write that scene.
And I wanted my editor to make me instead of just me doing it.
So we have 3 minutes left, and I want to ask one last question, and I think this is a good one to end on. There are plenty in the Discord if you guys have time to go back through and maybe catch some that I haven't been able to really pull out, or or I missed because I'm just scrolling. You guys are having such a great conversation out there without us. So last question. So we just talked about how you need to listen to your instinct when you know you need to go back to revise, but when do you know and you listen to yourself when you can put it down, when you know it's done, or it's as done as it's getting right now?
So, oh, you look like you have something you want to say, Martha, or?
No, you go ahead. I have a half-formed thought.
I think that there's when I get to the point where I'm rearranging the deck chairs, you know, where I'm like, okay, this is different, but is it really better? Then I need to stop, whether for ever or for this draft, and send it off and get some distance. Like, if I'm like, okay, no, this will make it better, I can see the true shape of the book coming into focus, I need to go this way and do this, then I should absolutely keep going, as long as I'm like, yes, this is better. But when I'm like, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do this, and I'm just fiddling around, then I need to stop, at least for now, to get some perspective, and maybe I'm just done.
Yeah. I have a thing I call, they went out to lunch and felt better. And it's from a Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing where they rewrote, the wreck of the ship up in the Great Lakes.
Oh
It's a
yeah.
Something Fitzgerald, is that the one? No.
Yeah, no.
I don't know.
I know, it's like it's a long song. It's a kind of a, God, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I think that's what it is.
Yes.
They rewrote the song.
Discord just pulled that up.
Okay, yeah, they rewrote the song so the ship got back to port. And one of the lines is, and they went out to lunch and felt better. And it's like, my thing is, I've tried to end the book before it gets to the point where the characters are going out to lunch and feeling better, and you're just kind of now writing about their lives after the book is actually, after the story is actually over, and trying to find that point to end on. So when I'm kind of doing stuff like that, that's when I kind of know that the story is done, and I usually need to back a little bit and find myself an actual good ending point. And yeah, but otherwise, like you said, is when it's just like you're rearranging the deck chairs and you're you know, doing sentence level adjustments and things like that. And it's like you can do those for a long time. You can do those in the after the editor's been through it, and you can do those in the copy edit and the, you know, the proofread and things like that. Those are going to come up. And actually, it's probably better to wait a little bit so you've got a clear view, because otherwise you're just hearing a recording of the book in your head. You're not actually reading words.
Valerie, last thought?
I agree with them.
Good job. Yay. All right. It is 11:50, and I believe our facilitator has another panel to get going. I will try to be on Discord. I probably have to go take care of some kids for a few minutes, but I'll try to pop back on and answer what questions I can answer. But it was lovely talking to all of you. I really appreciate your attention, your thought, and your patience at the very beginning when my child would not stop screaming. And hopefully everyone enjoys their con. And don't forget, we have to wait to be dismissed.
Okay. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Victoria.
Great
Bye,
talking to you.
everyone.
Great talking to all of you.